Welcome to Living Your Greatness. Each episode, we bring on great people to inspire you to achieve your greatness. We discuss topics all related to health and wellness. Listen to world-class stories, learn valuable lessons, and turn knowledge into action. It is now time for you to unlock your inner greatness. Welcome back, everyone, to the Living Your Greatness podcast. This is your host, Ben Mummy, and today we have a new guest on the show, and his name is Patrick Vellner. For those of you who don't know who Pat is one of the top athletes in the sport of CrossFit, and as well as a professional chiropractor. Before Pat became a CrossFit athlete, he was a competitive gymnast and a lacrosse player. After competing nationally for several years, he retired from gymnastics in 2010. Later, in 2012, Pat moved to Montreal to study Kinesiology at McGill University. At that time, he was only trying to keep himself fit. He went on to win the Open in 2019 and made it to the podium 3 out of the last 5 years. With Mat Fraser retiring in 2021, this could possibly be the year for Pat to become the fittest man on earth. So Pat, welcome to the show. It is great to have you on with us today.
Thanks a lot, Ben. I'm happy to be here.
So Pat, let's get started. Tell us about yourself. Where did you spend your formative years growing up in Canada? And what inspired you to pursue a career as a chiropractor?
I've kind of had the privilege of living all over Canada. So I grew up in Alberta, in Red Deer, Alberta, which isn't like a huge town, about 100,000 people. And I lived there till I was about 20. And then I went and studied in Montreal, where I actually met you. Did my undergrad at McGill University, and then I went to professional school in Toronto. And now I live in Vancouver Island. And, I've had my mom's from Halifax, we spent lots of time on the East Coast as well. So it's kind of fun. I've had the chance to, in my formative years, spend lots of time, all over Canada, which is cool. I think it's a really unique opportunity to get to do that. And, I think that you get to see a lot of different perspectives and learn a lot, and I hopefully develop yourself as a human. But I would say formative years, probably a lot spent in Alberta. It's where I kind of grew up and played lots of my sports and did things like that until, like I said, I was about 20. And then, I think in terms of career, I really stumbled into my athletic career in CrossFit post, traditional sports career. But my actual professional career as a chiropractor, I think it really came down to the fact that, I was a gymnast, I was a lacrosse player, I played some rugby, I was constantly getting kind of put through the ringer. And so I was using a lot of physio and chiro care growing up. And so I think I had a good chiropractor, and I had the opportunity to do that later on, once I was applying for professional programs after undergrad. And it was just, had good mentors, and then thought that was a good road I could go in. I think I wanted to get into a conservative care healthcare field, like physio or chiro, where it's sort of musculoskeletal related, and just conservative management of things. A lot of exercise therapy, a lot of muscle care, that sort of stuff. And I always wanted to do that, so it was just it made sense.
So Pat, how did CrossFit come into your life? And what has the journey been like for you?
Like I said, I really fell into that a bit. I think I competed as a gymnast for a lot of years, played, pretty high level lacrosse for a lot of years. And then when I went to university, right before I went away to university, I had retired from gymnastics, and I was still playing some lacrosse. And I actually played while I was in Montreal. You might not even know this, but I played for a team in Vermont while I was going to school in Montreal. So in the summers, I would work research positions at the school, and then I would commute to Vermont to play lacrosse on the weekends. So I did that for a few years, and I think I stopped before my last year there. But I feel like I kind of burnt out of sports, if I'm being honest. I think a career in gymnastics can do that to you. And by the end of my lacrosse career, I was really kind of feeling that way as well. And I don't think that commuting helped it at all. It was sort of a tough way to go play. And spend my weeks nerding out in the lab, and then my weekends getting the shit kicked out of me. So I just eventually was kind of done with it. I wanted to start getting back to the gym and just being healthy. I took a year-ish of not really doing any meaningful kind of training or exercise. And then, being someone who's studying and preparing to work in the health field that's, built around rehab and that sort of world and exercise care and therapy, I figured I should start getting back into a little bit better shape just for my own health. Right. And so I actually just ran into some people at the gym at school that were doing CrossFit stuff, and I didn't know anything about it at the time. But they were doing some fun kind of circuit workouts that is similar kind of training that I used to do for my gymnastics conditioning. So it's fun and engaging, and it was different every day. So I started kind of jumping in with those guys and doing little workouts with them. And then, yeah, they kind of were telling me about what CrossFit was and showing me the competitions, and kind of eventually were the people who pushed me to go into register for a competition and go do something. And, I think that my background was pretty diverse in sports, and I think gymnastics is a pretty good foundation for a lot of things. So I just was able to learn a lot of the skills fast when it came to weightlifting and the various different pieces that go into CrossFit. And I really am competitive, and I like that, being able to see progress and have a goal to strive for. And so I'm really goal oriented like that. And so it was really easy for me to stay really engaged and invested, because there were so many skills to improve on that any day you went in, you could easily find something that you could work on and improve at, and measure it, and be able to measure your progress. And that gets pretty addicting when you can start to see progress day after day, week after week. And I think early on in especially in, strength fields like that, or sports that require a lot of skill learning, you can see big gains quickly as your body adapts to the stimulus, as you learn the movements and things like that. And then you start to slow down a little bit. But at that point, I was kind of invested. And so it was fun. I think that really snowballed into going. And the first couple big events I registered in, I did very well in. And I think that also becomes very addicting. Just the feeling of success and being like, oh, I did this and I did well. And, but the work that I put in led to this and paid off. And you sort of see those dividends pay out. So yeah, that was kind of how I got into it. And then I feel like it feels like it happens really quickly. And it feels weird to me now to look back and be like, I've been competing in the CrossFit space for almost 10 years, right? Well, no, not quite, 7 years maybe. And so it just it feels weird to be like, oh wow, that happened really fast, like the snap of your fingers. But yeah, when you look backwards, it looks like it was a long road.
Oh, absolutely. So Pat, how have you managed your professional life with your elite athletics life?
Well, so for a lot of it, I was still in school. And school's an interesting place, an interesting type of demand. It's a bit of an artificial environment. And so I kind of started doing, especially CrossFit. I was still competing in gymnastics, when I was in high school. I did a couple years of college back home there as well. But you just get into your routines. When I was in university, and I'll speak to mostly my CrossFit athletics because that's what's more recent that I did through university, undergraduate, and professional school. But university, a lot of it is it's self-taught. There's a lot of classes that you don't need to show up to lectures. Nobody's there making sure that you do things, some lab components or some special small group stuff that you do need to be in. So you do the things you need to do. And I think I was always someone particularly in professional school, a little bit less in undergrad, that I would show up and do what I needed to do. I would be at the things that I needed to be at. And I was really good at understanding how I learned. And then understanding, if I went into a lecture and in the first hour of the first day, I decided that this professor's teaching style didn't work for me. But they are putting all their resources online. Their PowerPoints are online. We have such a luxury now that a lot of our resources are very available through your school portals. I would just never go back to that lecture for the whole year. And I would take that 2-hour block every day to, if I felt like I could learn that material in half the time, I'd just go to the library and learn it in half the time. Extra hour in my day that I could do something else with. So I was constantly banking time, maybe miss a lecture or two, but ones that I had planned to miss. And then, I'd go and eat lunch and sit in the library and learn the stuff from those 2 lectures. And then you go and train again, and you do, and I'd show up to the things that I needed to be at and meet all my requirements, but just not wasting time, like learning, like, okay, if I sit in this lecture and listen to the professor drone and all they're going to do is read the PowerPoint slides to me anyways, I'm not going to listen. I'm going to sit on Facebook or Instagram or something and scroll. And then later I'm going to have to teach myself this anyways. So like, why don't I just go put some focused work in now, or, go do something else now. And I think that like my biggest strength was being able to flip switches quickly, like being able to go from, okay, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to put 2 hard hours in, like I'm not even going to look up or talk to anybody, I'm just going to do that because I only have 2 hours, and then maximize that 2 hours, and then immediately like put on another hat and walk in and be like, now I'm in study time, I only have 90 minutes, I need to be like very focused. Because I think we run into that sort of momentum problem often in things that we do. You get like, you read a book, you read for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, and then you start to reread sentences, paragraphs, and you aren't really learning it or understanding it, or really paying attention to what you're reading even anymore. So I found that with studying is like, my partner can sit and study for 6 hours and she learns. And I cannot do that. Like I can learn for 2 hours maximum. And so I knew that about myself. So like after 2 hours, I needed to recharge my battery. So the way I would do that is like, all right, well, I'll go exercise for 2 hours. And then like after 2 hours of exercising, I'm dragging my feet around a little bit. Like you just are tired, you're hungry, your body's out of juice. So then, you go eat something, and then it's like back to studying, like back to learning for another 2 hours, and kind of chunking up my days like that. It was super helpful. And I still use that kind of strategy now. I plan my days the night before, and I kind of try to figure out where I need to be and what I need to do in the day. And I slot my times out. And it keeps you honest and it keeps you on time. And you try to say, okay, between, 9 and 10 this morning, I have this podcast. And then, from 10 to 12, I've got to go exercise, and then I'm going to have lunch, and then I'm going to, do some whatever work for an hour. And then you just sort of slot out your days. And I think that level of organization, which isn't a high demand, it's a pretty low bar of organization, can actually pay out a lot. But the key to that, the keystone is figuring out how you work best, because like the way you divvy up your day will depend on that. Like I had to divvy my days up into small pieces because I don't know, maybe I'm just more ADD like that, but I just knew from 8 years of school that's how it worked for me. It was from personal experience, like trial and error, that I'm like, this works well, this doesn't work. And so once you figure out what works well, you don't listen to somebody else who says like, no, you should do it this way. Like, I don't know, this way works for me and it's great, so I'm going to do that and run with it. And like, so university was great, professional school was great because you're an adult learner and people give you the autonomy to do that. And now, as just like an adult, it's like you have that autonomy. You make your decisions, you plan your days. And, even in my job now as a chiropractor, like we plan our clinic days out and I make my own schedule. So you can make things out the way that they work for you. And that's a luxury that I have based on the career that I've taken. But that I think is the key for me, is like a baseline of organization, and then just a clear understanding of how you work the most efficiently. And then not trying to squirm too much outside of that just because like other people kind of like to do things a different way. Like if it works for you, don't don't worry about it, just do it.
Those are all really great points that you brought up, Pat. But now, if we shift into another direction here, what does a typical training day or week look like in the life of an elite CrossFit athlete?
It depends on the day, but it's usually a lot of one. As I'm getting older, it's changing a little bit as well. Now I'll admit that. I feel like nowadays I spend a little more time working with my body and like stretching and warming up well and just doing some really basic habits that I'm trying to, really solidify. That's so I don't have to think about them, that are just going to help with a little longevity and help me feel a little bit better. But yeah, a lot of days for me right now, I'm basically on every day. So I don't have any days that I'm not training like full days. I'm working at the clinic. So I don't have like Monday through Sunday. I'm doing something every day, which is like, it's okay. Some days are a little lower impact. So you still get a little bit of mental recharge. Because I think that that's also really important. But for the most part, I'm kind of go, go, go. Mostly I'll have either, I think 2 or 3 days a week, I'll train 2 sessions. So I'll kind of get up at like 7ish, have a nice big breakfast, try to be training by 9, train 9 till a little before noon, usually like 11:30ish, 12 maybe, with like all my warm up and everything. Have a nice lunch, walk the dog, go back and train again, and do like another probably 90 minutes. Um, Spend like half an hour, maybe an hour, doing some stretching and rehab stuff, and then kind of chill. Hopefully I'm done by kind of 3-4 o'clock, and then I have most of the afternoon to kind of just putter and do some things. So, now that it's summer, like mow the lawn and just do some things at home and help out and whatever. And also being done by then means that usually Michelle will be home within like the hour or something like that, hour or two. And then we get to hang for the evening, and I'm done, and I don't have other things that are pulling me away. And it depends on days where I'm working. Like sometimes I'm working from like 8 to 4. And usually on days like that, I'm not training. And then I have some days where I work like a half day and then I still train in the afternoon. So it's sort of just like, there's usually a morning and afternoon block, and they're either work or training. So some days they're both training, some days they're both work, some days it's work and training. And that's basically, most days I try to be done by 4 o'clock, 4 or 5, unless there's like some other circumstance that means I have to train late in the evening. But yeah, and it's sort of a little bit of everything training wise. Like, as the summer rolls around, I'll get to do some more fun sessions outside where I'm just like running and swimming or doing things like that at the lake. But right now, and particularly during the pandemic, I've been doing a lot of indoor training. We're fortunate that we moved into a house on last summer that had space to build a garage gym. So I've been able to do a lot of stuff at home, and not have to kind of go out to the gym, because it's unfortunately right now it's just a bit inconvenient. And to train at the gym, it was closed for a while, and then with stages of reopening, we were able to train there, but you had to wear a mask while you worked out, which, as anybody who's ever done that might tell you, it's not the most comfortable thing. So given the option between working out there or working out at home, just in the interest of comfort alone, like I'll do a lot of stuff at home. So it's been a little weird in that regard. I spend a lot of time at my house because I'll like work out at home, then I'll eat, then I'll walk the dog, then I'll work out again. And but it is what it is. We're all doing what we can.
Thanks for sharing, Pat. It's always great to hear behind the scenes of each athlete and how they train. So, Pat, my next question is going to be a little bit different. We're going to be going back into your past. So, at the 2016 East Regionals, you suffered from a torn bicep muscle in your left arm and went on to qualify for your first CrossFit Games. Even with this injury-related limitation, you had an incredible performance and became the third fittest man on earth at the 2016 CrossFit Games. Following the excitement from the Games, you received MRI results that suggested surgery repair. You decided to choose rehab and train instead to compensate for the loss. What motivated you to make this decision?
This is one where it's kind of pays off to have the education that I do, and to have like been studying in fields that are like muscle joint, like MSK related fields. The injury that I had I tore my long head of my biceps completely, on the left side. And that isn't really a very strong muscle in the arm. It's a bit of an anchor. It's a stabilizer. It does a little bit of supination, some arm flexion, but not a lot. Like, it's quite weak. So, looking at it from the short term, from regionals to the time I had to compete at the CrossFit Games, there was only a period of about a couple months, I think. So the thought then was, okay, if you get it repaired, you can't compete at the games, because the surgical healing time will just be too long, right? Like, the rehab from that would be too long. So that was my first year qualifying as an individual to compete at the games, and I was kind of like, I would prefer to be able to do this. Like, I've put a lot of time and effort into qualifying here, and I think I have a good shot. And so I just sort of like did a little research on the repairs and spoke to a few people. And the repair at the time that they would do on that muscle wasn't actually a functional repair. It was basically an aesthetic repair, meaning that it doesn't return any strength or function to that muscle. After the repair, the function of muscle would still be lost, but they would attach it to a place so that you wouldn't look like you had, like, you ever seen somebody with a muscle tear where they get a little divot or something like that? You would not have that aesthetic effect, that mark there. Some people have quite extreme versions. They call it a Popeye deformity because of like Popeye's really weird proportioned arms, but mine wasn't that significant for whatever reason. So I was just sort of looking at it like, at the end of the day, all this is going to do is like take away this little divot and nothing else, but it's going to cost me a chance to compete at the games. And like, the surgery option was a no-brainer. Then it was just, I had to make sure that I was able to rehab to a point that I could still compete effectively anyways, which I thought I could do because, I at that competition where I injured it, I hurt it in the very first event of 7. And I still finished 3rd at that competition as well. So, I felt like I was capable of doing it as long as I could get, the pain and inflammation down to a point where it was acceptable. To be working in a field as a chiropractor where you use your arms and your body a lot in work. So actually, in terms of like disability claims or things like that from in the chiropractic field, there's a lot of like wrist or elbow or shoulder related injuries just because of the ways we posture people and then have to apply force. So if you've already got a bad shoulder, am I in the risk of like, getting arthritis early, by the time I'm like 40, like, am I going to not be able to work in my career because of this injury if I don't repair it? So that was where I spoke to some docs about that and just said like, hey, this is my concern. This is what I'm thinking. Like, I would prefer to compete in this event, but I'm a little concerned about long-term effects. And it was kind of funny. I worked it all up in my head. And then when I spoke to the docs about it, they were not dismissive at all. I don't want to give that impression, but they were like, almost laughed about it because the doctors, one of them was an orthopedic surgeon who saw me when I initially injured my shoulder. He was at that competition. One of them was my family doctor from home, and they both kind of laughed at me and said like, look, how many years did you compete in gymnastics? And I was like, I don't know, like 12. And they're like, yeah, your shoulders are gonna hurt. They're like, when you're 50 or 60, like, they basically feel like you're gonna have shoulder arthritis. Like, I don't know if nobody told you, but like, you're gonna have shoulder pain for sure. But here's the good news: like, so is everybody. You might get there a couple years before your friends, but I wouldn't let it, get in the way of things that you want to do now. It's not at that point. Like, this sort of an injury isn't gonna change that, like create an inflection point so drastic that you're gonna be like 20 years early onset. So it was kind of funny. They're like, we had these imaging results, and they were interesting to read because there was a lot of findings on them, and very few of them were related to the injury that I just had. It was like one line at the very end was like, oh yeah, full thickness tear of the long-headed bicep. But like, there was, 3 paragraphs of findings that were about like old tears that looks like they've healed, like some starts of degeneration in various areas that are all related to like my past athletic careers. And so everybody who looked at it was like, look, if we looked at your other shoulder right now, it would probably say the same thing. Like, yeah, you're going to have like some soreness in your shoulders. There's things you can do for that. And that's a lot of what I do in my field, is like help people deal with those sorts of chronic pain things, like giving some rehab, physio, various things you can do to minimize that pain and or manage it over time. So, I'm optimistic that I at least know what to do because I teach people what to do. But it was funny. It's very much like I was much ado about nothing. I worked myself up, and then they just kind of were like, hey, if you're worried about arthritis, don't be, because you're going to get it and everybody's going to get it. I was like, oh, that's a very good point. So at the end of the day, they kind of, the joint decision was, I'd rather have arthritis with a couple medals around my neck.
Absolutely, for sure. Pat, thanks for walking us through that decision process. So this actually connects well to my next question. A good friend of mine finds it fascinating that CrossFit athletes can perform grueling workouts with something off in their body. Is it truly a mind over matter mindset? Or does the athlete adapt the way they perform around their injury? If it is a mind over matter mindset, how do you feel after the workout when the adrenaline has gone away?
That's a good question. I think that there's probably a bit of that. And I think that there's something to be said about like flow state and that sort of an experience that, people can have outside of athletic endeavors, where you just sort of get in the zone and everything else kind of melts away, right? So I think that there's an ability to focus in on task at hand that is important. And I think some of the best athletes have that, and some of the best performers in many fields show that, right? Um, so yeah, although I would say that, some of it depends. There are obvious limitations to a mind over matter mindset. Like what's actually happening does matter. Like you can't break your leg and run a marathon. Like it just, at a certain point, there are physical limitations. So I think one of our goals as athletes is to find where those lines are, and in know your body well enough through training that in competition you understand what you can and can't do. And competitions are always, you're gonna stretch boundaries and surprise yourself, but in training you don't really want to be doing that. So sometimes you really save those efforts for competition where it's like there's something on the line. In training you should really be listening to your body, and in competition sometimes you have to be able to shut it out, right? And do things regardless of what your body is telling you. But I would say, in my context with my shoulder, I think it's important to make decisions like that with information. One of the reasons I went to go see some people about it was that I was concerned that there would be long-term harm done if I continued without doing something else beforehand. I think that there's a big difference between hurt and harm, and sometimes like short-term discomfort that isn't going to cause you any type of long-term consequence is totally fine and acceptable, and you learn to deal with it. However, you need to be able to identify, if I'm in the middle of a workout or an effort like that and something feels off, you need to be able to say, okay, is this hurt or harm? Like, is this just painful or annoying or uncomfortable? Or is this something that if I continue to do, it will get worse and could potentially sideline you for a period of time or have, like I said, long-term consequences? So I think that you have to learn to distinguish between those two things, and you make your decisions based on that. I've seen people do amazing things. I've done amazing things that I look back on and think like, I don't know how I did that, and I wouldn't be able to do it again based on your environment and the way you lock in. So I think there's a lot to that mind over matter mindset. However, I think that it's important to make decisions with information, and I think that the more practice you have, the better you get at it. So I think that we as athletes are very good at feeling our whole bodies and then knowing like, okay, is this something that I felt before? Is this like a hurt that's tolerable, or is this a bad hurt? And so if it's a bad hurt, you've got to stop, or you should, or you have to just at least understand the consequences of not stopping. So that's sort of the whole thing for me, is like, as someone who also works in a healthcare oriented field, is like, I do a lot of things on a daily, weekly basis that I wouldn't recommend my patients do, but I do it with the knowledge and information that I have. And so I would just want everybody to be equipped with that same type of knowledge and make the best decisions for you, right? Because I would never pretend that a lot of the workouts that I do or the things that I do are necessarily good for me. That's the difference between like elite level sport and exercise for health, right? So that's the sort of the difference in what we do. But yeah, it's an interesting question. I think there's something there for sure, but it's I think that that's a big distinction to make, is that there are differences that between, like, there are some things you should try to block out and some things you should not.
So Pat, moving to a different direction, in the book Atomic Habits, James Clear wrote, breakthrough moments are often the result of many previous actions, which build potential required to unleash a major change. Do you agree with this statement? If so, could you please share an example from your life?
It's funny, I have this book and I haven't read it yet. I've had it for like years. I'll get to it. I think that's a true statement. I think that it's sort of like, people say this in a lot of different ways. I've heard it said a lot of times, but like, opportunities come to those who are prepared, right? Like those who plan. Like there's no like the people with the best luck are the people that are best prepared, right? Like you need to be, because opportunity strikes at random moments, and you need to be prepared to jump on it when it comes. So if you're well prepared, an opportunity, however small, you feel like you can grab. Whereas, if you're not prepared, you might need a really big opportunity to slap you in the face for you to realize it. Because you might just be not looking as hard. Like I would think of it as like, like if you're, I don't know, if you're like a big person trying to fit through a small window, or a small person trying to fit through a big door, like if you just make yourself small, or like you're the size of a pea, like you can get through any opportunity, like any window, any little hole you'll get through, you'll get something out of that, right? But it's an interesting, I think that's a great way to think. It allows you to just keep being prepared and keep building for the future, right? And not always feeling put down or put out by not having an opportunity. It's like every chance is a way to build, right? So you're constantly building for the next thing, and preparing for something that will come eventually. Because I mean, everybody, I think that's just a good attitude to exist in. People like to be around someone like that. If you behave that way, like something's going to happen for you eventually. I think that makes a ton of sense. I don't know, for example, in my own life, I don't know, like in my athletic career alone, I think that I had great opportunities in the sport of CrossFit because of a lot of my background and things like that, and things that I did and knowledge that I had. And so when I finally got some opportunities to compete on big stages, I was very successful very quickly. And so I took advantage of that, the opportunities that I had. And a lot of it was based on just like not my 2 years or 1 year of CrossFit training. It was based on my 12 years of athletics and all kinds of other sports, right? It's really, you could do the same thing on my academic side, getting into the programs that I got into. I think striving to be well prepared is great. And it also, like I said, it keeps your eyes open for a lot of different opportunities. I feel like it allows you to be a little more open, instead of, if you're like less prepared, you need the perfect opportunity to suit your needs. Whereas if you build a broad skill set and base, you can move in and pivot in any direction very quickly and very easily. So, you can take advantage of opportunities, however big or small, in many different directions. So, I think that's a really good way to behave and think. You might miss cool opportunities. There's cool opportunity everywhere that you might not even know about yet or realize. So just harvesting broad skill sets and trying to keep your head on a swivel is a good way to be.
Absolutely, Pat. You definitely brought up a lot of great points. So, Pat, if we go back to another competition, during the first day of the 2018 CrossFit Games, your bike just fell apart. For the remaining 9 laps of the race, you used a standard bicycle that did not fit you well. This was not a great way to start the games. What went through your head when you busted your bike? And what was going through your mind before each of the remaining events before finishing second place overall?
No, definitely not a great way to start the competition. But I will say my bike didn't just fall apart. Like, it was a 3-person crash. And this is the reality of that event at the games that year. Is it's a 40-man field. I think there was 2 or 3 people in the field who had ever done a criterion race before. There were several people in the field who had never really ridden bicycles before. So that's what happens when you put 40 men on bikes and make them race, when they have varying levels of experience and skill. So I think it was a combination of, I was trying to be aggressive around, that was the last corner of the first lap, and it was the hardest corner of the race. But first lap, everyone's still trying to kind of jostle for position, and I was trying to be aggressive on my corner, and so were a couple other guys, and people took different lines, and there's less of that courtesy because there's less experience. And so a guy came in contact with my side, and my derailleur basically ripped right off the bike. So I had to just go change the bike out. It sucked a lot. The bike that I had for the rest of the race was like, the seat post was super low. Like it was like riding a kid's bike. And, then it also put me about at least a half, 3/4 of a lap behind everyone else. So it was tough. I mean, there's nothing you can do in that in that instance, other than just try to keep plowing forward. The easiest way to say, at the end of the race, that race, it sucked. That day we had 4 events. And so my goal instantly became to work my way back to the top heat of men. So the top 10 overall scores by the end of that day. So that, there's a bit of an advantage that comes with being in the top heat. You get to see people go before you. You get to compete against the better competitors. So they often will push you a little harder or make you move a little faster. So the goal was like, I don't want to lose that advantage. So I need to work really hard today to get back to that. And I did. And then, for the rest of the competition, really, like, I think I came like 35th or 36th in that event out of 40 after that crash. And the goal was basically like, there's nowhere to go from up, right? I can't really do a lot worse than I just did. So, the worst is behind you kind of thing. And like every step needs to be forward progress from here on. And it kind of takes the pressure off in a weird way. Like coming into those competitions when you're one of the favorites in the competition, there's eyes on and there's pressure and every move you make is scrutinized. So when you're at the top, there's nowhere to go but down, right? And people are really, really like watching hard. Whereas when you've struggled, then it's easy to impress, So I was kind of like, hey, from here on out, like I can move up. Like I'm just going to keep moving up every event for the rest of the competition. And so you sort of shake off those jitters really quickly. But, I think by the end of this first or second day, that was kind of long in the past. There's so many events over the course of that weekend that you really can't look backwards very long. You've got to kind of constantly push forward and put your blinders on. And that, I think, is something I learned to do well from competing in gymnastics, where it's the same kind of deal. You've got multiple events and you get scored on each of them. And you can win medals on every individual event, and you have an all-around score as well. And like if you totally scrap one event, you can't just pack it in, because you still have to try to do as well as you can in those other events. And you can make event finals and you can do great things in each event individually. So having a really strong reset is sort of something I learned early in my athletic career. So it's paid off. It's not the first time that's happened to me. At the CrossFit Games 2017, I took a huge bonk in the first event as well, and had a 30-something place finish, and then had to fight back to a 3rd place finish. So it's happened to me more often than I would like, but I've become somewhat notorious for it. But it's good that, given situations like that, I've always been able to climb out of it and continue to move forward.
So Pat, moving into a different direction, there's no doubt a couple has to make certain sacrifices when one is in a relationship with an elite athlete. What are some of the challenges that your relationship had to face, yet how have you and Michelle managed to overcome these challenges?
It's funny. I think that we live in a pretty extreme kind of situation. Michelle, my partner, is a family doctor. And so, her schooling's been intense. So it's not just me, right? Like the pressures of going to school and competing in sport are big, and there's a lot of demands there, but there's a lot of demands in her life as well, right? So I think we do our best to support each other. What's weird about it, and I honestly, I don't want to say it's good, because it obviously was not great, but we, in the last bunch of years, we were living apart long distance, because she did her med school in Calgary while I went to professional school in Toronto. And that was sort of a lot of the earlier stages of my CrossFit career were while I was in Toronto there. So as much as it's not great, I think in a weird way, it allowed us to really focus on the things that we need to do individually for a period of time, which is tough. Like, I think that those are those times where you would see that struggle in the relationships, where it's like very difficult to divide your time again into another place, and people feel ignored, but because we both had something quite intense going on, we could kind of both focus on that, and there was a bit of understanding. And long distance it sucks, and we did our best with it, but now we're on the outside of it, and it's great. And I feel like now I almost feel a little more of that pressure that you would expect than I did for a lot of my career, because we just weren't together all the time. Like, and it was just, it was easier you'd have a phone call here and there, and like it was fine. But it was like the expectation was lower, I guess, because you were long distance and it was already difficult. Whereas like now, it's funnier because, like I said, I'm 7 days on between work and training. So just days where it's like, oh, like we should go for a hike today. It's like, okay, well, I got to work around this and that. So there's a little more of that pressure now, almost, where I'm trying to work around my schedule or her schedule, and we're trying to get our time in together. And we're both still quite busy doing things, but now we're trying to make more time for each other. So it's almost like adding something in. So I don't think that either of us has sacrificed a lot. I mean, I hate to say that, but I think that our goals and lifestyle are similar enough that we want to do a lot of the same things, and we're hoping for a lot of the same things out of life. We don't want to work too much. We don't want to whatever. So we've done a pretty good job. I think we could always do better. I want to do more things. This year again has been difficult because there's a little less opportunity to go out and do things together or do things with friends. And I think that right now that's what we lack a bit. But honestly, to go from long distance to then basically after a half a year back living together, we went into COVID lockdown, basically, where we were now spending more time together than we had in the last, 4 years combined. Had actually been really good for us. I think it was nice to get more of that time back together, and kind of make up for lost time in a way, and just align ourselves on what we wanted for a vision for the next few years, and then work together to make that a reality. I think that we work together well. We try to make most of our decisions, if not all of them, together. So it's been actually really good. I think I'm really lucky.
So, Pat, you have shared that you've been competing in sports for most of your life. How will you adjust to your new lifestyle the day that you stop competing? Olympic athletes like Michael Phelps have shared it is a difficult adjustment to make.
This is a question I've talked to a lot of other athletes in the sport about this, and I don't know. I've seen a few different people do it different ways, and my coach, who was a mentor of mine for a long time, she competed as games athlete for many years, and when she was done, she was done. Like, she checked right out, and she coaches now, but I'll ask her sometimes, or people be like, do you ever like get the itch? Like, you want to go do it again? And she's like, no, absolutely not. Which is great. It means that she punched out at the right time, and I think athletes always struggle with that, knowing like, did I get everything I possibly could out of it? And I think it's rare to find someone who really can honestly say yes. I think that people always struggle with either some factor ending their career before they would have liked, whether it's injury or circumstance or whatever it might be, or people who have phenomenal careers and then hang it up because there's this pressure to hang it up on top, or to go out as the winner that everybody remembers you as, and whatever, not to try to like struggle for top 10 finishes for the last 3 or 4 years of your career and just fizzle out. So it's an interesting question, and I think I'm in a good position, given that I have a good career outside of sport. I'm trying to still work while I train, albeit not a ton. I work less days than most of my peers do, but it gives me something to keep my brain sharp so that I can make an easy transition when I decide that that's what I want to do. And it's tough. Like, I feel like I want to keep competing as long as I feel like I can be competitive, and put forth an effort that I'm proud of. But it will be difficult. I think it'll be weird and gradual, and I'm not sure how immersed in the space I'm going to stay. A lot of that might depend on what happens in the next couple of years, but I would like to stay involved a little bit. Maybe I can create some sort of platform or touch point in the community as a therapist that I can sort of stay involved, because it's a pretty extreme physical sport, and then there's always going to be that need there. So that could be something cool I could see to keep me a little bit involved. And I think that having that sort of touch point will keep you, from experiencing that, post-competitive depression, like guys like Michael Phelps that talk about with the Olympics. I think that those first few years of not competing will be hard to watch other people compete. Well, maybe not. The first few years might not be, because I might actually still be at some of those events, being like quite involved. But as the years stretch on, and then you're kind of like, yeah, you check it out online now and then to like watch people and see the next generation and watch your generation like age out. I think it'll be weird. And I don't know. I'm sure there will be a point where I kind of stop paying close attention. But I bet you it'll take a while. And I don't know. I would like to stay involved in some way. I've made a lot of cool friends and good contacts through the sport. And I think that one of the interesting things, now is that, with the pandemic world, I actually like keep in contact with a lot of those friends, maybe better than I do with like friends I grew up with, because there's like this more of a sense of immediacy. Like that we're all geographically isolated at the moment. And, those are people that I actually like, I share something with more now. So as much as they're people I see probably less often in a year, it's almost like we have a lot more common ground. So being able to sort of see some of those people for a period would be really nice and stay more involved. I don't know. I have been wrestling more with that lately. I think as you start to see that twilight approach, you're like, I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be like. I don't know what I'm going to do. Am I going to still be at the gym, when I'm 40 at the CrossFit gym and some young kids like crushing me in the workouts? Like, how is that going to feel? I have no idea. So I think it's really hard to know until you're really looking down the barrel of that. And so I'm going to try to plan for it and be as ready as I can. But I think that nothing will really get you as ready as you wish you were.
Thanks for sharing that, Pat. So, Pat, during a global pandemic, it has been very different training and competing as an elite athlete in CrossFit, especially in a sport like CrossFit that thrives off of community. It is clear that you and Brent Fikowski have kept the spirit high. Can you share with our listeners some of the things that you both have done this past year?
Yeah, it is different. Well, this is even like I was just saying that, some of my friends in the sport I've been in more contact with than, some of my friends from school or things like that recently, just because like this life has gone on in some way. There's been online events and touch points. So people kind of have continued. And like, a lot of my life in the CrossFit space exists in the social sphere and like on social media. So you can constantly kind of touch with people in those areas. But I think that the competitive side, people are getting a little better now, and I think the last year without live competitions has kind of pushed people to like lighten up a little bit, because there's like nothing to get as serious about. But we've always tried to make some of the online competitions a little more fun. Brent and I, and he was doing this with some other athletes before I got involved, but what we do every year is the major initial qualifier is an online competition, and we always just make like a friendly wager between events of just like, hey, the winner of this workout, the loser has to do like a humiliation of some kind, and you post it on social media, and it kind of just generates traction for the competition as well. And that's a competition that the general public is involved with. Like it's not an elite competition by any means. It's just a qualifier for us. So it gets people to kind of see us compete. To us, it's more of a formality. We're very likely going to advance no matter what. And so it's sort of a way to be like, hey, we can have fun with this still. And it's not like, it doesn't need to be so intense, because you can get bogged down by that. Like when you keep the intensity and stress level through the roof all the time, it wears you out. Right. So I think it's a fun way to spice it up. And it also makes you work pretty hard, because there's something on the line. Right. So we've done a lot of that. We kind of have this fun banter that goes back and forth between us, and have involved several other athletes over the last few years. So that's a lot of fun. And Brent and I also, we share a couple sponsors, so we had the opportunity to do a few things here and there. But those types of things have been fun during the pandemic, because it's just, these online kind of call outs and challenges. And frankly, the community as a whole has been really good at creating more like online mini competitions for people. And part of it is trying to generate revenue, I think, for gyms who are obviously struggling with memberships and things like that, and closures. So it's people trying to support themselves as well, and trying to support the community. So it's cool to see everybody kind of lean on each other a little bit, right? So I think that at the end of the day is our goal with that stuff, is to try to spearhead some of that action and be a part of it, and show that even the elite athletes who are often kind of shown as like we have too much on the line to joke around about it. That we can have some fun with it, and it's all good.
Absolutely, Pat. It's been definitely interesting to watch on the sidelines as a follower. So, Pat, what advice would you give to someone who's starting out in their fitness journey?
It's a good question. I talk a lot with patients now about goals and things. And I think that that's really, really important. I think it's the simplest thing you can do that's going to have the most profound effect is actually taking some time to set goals that are realistic. You would have done in school SMART goals,
Yeah,
right? It's
yeah,
like specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time sensitive. A lot of them feel the same. Achievable, realistic. A lot of them are kind of the same. But regardless, point being, goals that are not going to leave you frustrated, right? They might seem very small, but ways that you can stay on track and kind of keep your eyes forward, set some long-term goals, but make sure you set some very short-term achievable goals. And then the other part of that I always try to remind people is that hindsight is really important, or like retrospective vision, to be like, okay, in 3 months time or a year's time, sometimes you're like treating a patient or whatever, and then they're getting frustrated after a year or something, feeling like that they've made no progress, or that their progress has slowed. And you're like, yeah, like it's slowed because you've gotten so much closer to where you're going. And that's how these things work. Like you've gotten close to good. And if you take a second to turn around and look backwards and look at like where you started, you'll see that like you've actually covered a lot of ground. It just feels like now that the progress is slow, you have less of those waypoints that are like making you feel really good. That it can get frustrating, but like don't get frustrated in the process, because like look at what you've already achieved. I think that really often we get stuck looking forward all the time, which is good, but it's an easy cause of frustration. Like if you take a second to be like, if I every day was like, hey, good example. So I just hit a new personal best snatch weightlifting like a couple weeks ago. I haven't increased that lift in about 4 years. Does it mean I'm not any stronger or any better or any more consistent? Like, no, it doesn't mean any of those things. I just hadn't done it. And, at this point, like uh, someone could say, over that 4 year period, like, well, weren't you frustrated? Like, didn't you get whatever? Like, didn't you want to stop? And it's like, well, yeah, like maybe periodically, like fleetingly. But if I just like look back and be like, when I first started doing CrossFit, doing any weightlifting in like 2014, um, I put a video up recently as well of me doing like 95-pound snatches in like 2014, and they're like terrible. And like the difference between like a 290-pound snatch and then a 95-pound snatch is a lot. And so you lose that perspective when you're like, oh, like I just feel like I'm really stuck, not making any progress. It's like, well, yeah, but like look at all the progress you've made. Like you've done a lot of good. And it's important to still allow that to motivate you. Like as soon as it's behind you, don't forget about it. And take it for granted, right? Like that still is an enormous amount of like productivity and work that's gone into that. So I think it's important for people to remember to look backwards sometimes, like set your goals, set your sights, like use your short and long-term goals. But periodically, if you're feeling frustrated, go have a look at where you started, because it'll really often change your tune really quickly. Because we forget and we start to just take things as our new normal, and yeah, and just take things for granted and forget where we started. And you'll surprise yourself more often than not.
Absolutely. So, Pat, what is your 5 minute daily fitness habit that you would recommend to almost anyone?
Oh, daily fitness habit. Nobody's going to want to hear this, but doing some mobility or stretching every day. Nobody wants to hear it. And believe me, I don't want to say it. I feel like I competed a career in gymnastics, and the day I retired, I swore I would never stretch again. And then here I am, like, what am I, 11 years later? Now I'm like wishing that I just didn't let it go as much as I did. And I'm seeing more of the benefit. And I feel like taking a bit of time, my routine now is I usually eat a pretty big breakfast, and then my next thing on my to-do list is to train, but I can't just go on a full stomach and do that. So like once I eat, I usually like take a couple minutes, answer some emails, and then I'll I'll just like do a few shoulder, some back, some like hip stuff. I'll just like lay down and do some active stuff, some passive stuff. Just like create a little bit of a routine, a flow routine that you can get through reasonably quickly. And I do that. And then I start kind of getting changed and warming up. But that alone just like makes my body feel so much better in the day. Like I would do it twice a day and feel great. And anytime I don't do it, it's only out of laziness. I always have time to do it. Sometimes I just don't want to. And I always like, by the time I go to bed, I'm like, I just wish I did that. Like I feel so much better when I do it. And I know people hate stretching and I hate stretching too, but it trust me, it feels great afterwards. You'll never regret it.
Yeah, stretching is definitely not fun.
Yeah, it's one thing that like everybody can agree on pretty much.
So Pat, as you know, the purpose of this podcast is to inspire people to achieve greatness and enhance their overall personal well-being. What is your definition of greatness?
That's a good question. I think that your whole concept here is a pretty good one, where there's a lot of aspects to that and a lot of elements and a lot of touch points where, you know, one can be great at many different things, right? So I think to me, it's more of a question of what means a good life for you. Like what means that you've lived a good life, or what's the life that you want to live. I think that like to the concept that you have here about enhancing personal well-being is a good one. I think that, you know, to live a really great life, to be productive, but to give back and help other people reach their goals for what greatness and whatever that might be. So, you know, I'm very fortunate. I think that we, as a unit here in our household, worked very hard for our whole lives so far, and are now starting to be able to like see the payoff where, you know, we've established good careers, both of us. We worked very hard. Like, you know, we're at a point where we're like, are very happy to live a pretty good life. You know, I feel like emotionally we're stable, like financially, job related, like everything is just like, we've done a lot of work up to now to do that. So now then, like, what do you do from there? Trying to help other people get to that level, I think is a really appropriate goal. So I don't know. I think the definition of greatness for me is just trying to live whatever your definition of a good life is, and then doing whatever you can to help other people achieve the same.
That is a great definition. So Pat, where can our listeners go to follow you online?
So there's the question for my home address. Hey, I probably just Instagram is probably the easiest way. I'm currently struggling getting my Twitter like reactivated because I changed my email and they like for some reason won't let me back into it. So I think just Instagram is probably the best way, which is just at @Vellner. I have a page on Facebook as well, but it's much less active.
All right, great, Pat. So I'll make sure to add that into the podcast notes. So yeah, Pat, I just want to take the time to thank you again for being on the show today. You've been really generous with your time, and I look forward to having you on the show again.
Cool. I appreciate it, buddy. It's good to catch up. Yeah, let me know. Happy to see where this goes for you. Happy to be on.
Thank you for listening to the Living Your Greatness podcast. If this show has added value, please subscribe, leave a rating, and make a review.